What if a single act of kindness in a land carved by cruelty could mend not one, but 3 broken souls? What if the quiet strength of a lone cowboy, a man who had already lost everything, was the only shield a desperate woman had against the darkness hunting her? This is the story of how a bruised hand reaching for help found not just a protector, but a home. The dust of the prairie tells many tales, but few are as raw and true as this one. Caleb rode with the setting sun at his back, the vast, unforgiving plains of the west painted in hues of orange and bruised purple. The day's work was done. His small ranch, a testament to sweat and sorrow, waited for him over the next rise. Beside him, trotting on her pony, was the only piece of his heart that still beat with untarnished joy, his 6-year-old daughter, Sarah. Her laughter was a melody against the lonesome whisper of the wind. She pointed a small finger toward a cluster of sagebrush near the trail. "Look, Daddy." A broken doll. Caleb squinted, his sun-creased eyes, the color of a faded sky, narrowing. It was no doll. It was a woman, crumpled and still, her dress the color of dirt and torn at the seams. He swung down from his horse, his movements economical and sure, born of a life that afforded no wasted energy. "Stay here, sweetheart," he murmured to Sarah, his voice a low, steady rumble. He approached cautiously. The west taught a man that stillness could be a trap. But as he drew closer, he saw the faint rise and fall of her chest. He saw the dark bruises that marred the pale skin of her cheek and the raw, scraped skin on her forearms. She was alive. Barely. He knelt, his shadow falling over her. Her eyes flooded open, pools of terrified blue in a face etched with pain and exhaustion. They were the eyes of a cornered animal, expecting a final blow. Caleb said softly, holding his hands up to show they were empty. "I'm not going to hurt you." Tears welled and traced clean paths through the grime on her cheeks. Her voice was a cracked whisper, a sound that seemed to physically pain her to produce. "Please. He's coming. You have to help me." She tried to push herself up, to scramble away, but her body betrayed her, collapsing back to the earth with a choked sob. There was a story here, a brutal one he didn't need to hear to understand. He'd seen its chapters written on the faces of others who had washed up on the shores of this hard land. He was a man who had built walls around his heart after burying his wife 2 years prior, a heart he now reserved solely for his daughter. He had no room for trouble. But looking at this woman, so utterly broken, he saw not trouble, but a reflection of his own past grief. He saw a soul drowning in the same sea of loss that had almost claimed him. Sarah, ignoring his instruction, had slipped off her pony and crept closer. She stood beside her father, her small hand clutching his worn leather chaps. She looked from the crying woman to her father's stoic face. "Is she hurt, Daddy?" Caleb nodded, his gaze never leaving the woman's face. "She is." Cerebell, he made a decision, the kind a man makes not with his head, but with the very core of his being. He couldn't leave her. It wasn't in him. He reached down, his movements gentle. "I'll help you. Let's get you out of the dust." The woman flinched at his touch but didn't pull away. As he scooped her into his arms, she felt impossibly light, as if the world had already taken too much from her. She buried her face in his chest, a shuddering breath escaping her lips. It was not a sound of relief, but of profound, bone-deep terror. He carried her to his horse, settling her in front of him. As he did, Sarah stepped forward and reached out a tiny, hesitant hand, placing it on the woman's arm. The woman's head lifted, her tear-filled eyes meeting the child's wide, innocent gaze. And in that moment, a flicker of something other than fear crossed her face. For the first time, she looked not at a potential threat, but at a small, concerned child. The journey back to the ranch was silent, save for the rhythmic clopping of hooves and the woman's quiet, hitching breaths. Caleb could feel the tremors running through her, the fight-or-flight instinct warring with her body's utter collapse. He held her steady, his arm a solid band around her waist. He offered no platitudes, no empty promises. The prairie didn't abide by such things. It demanded action, and for now, his action was this: a safe ride, a steady arm, a silent vow of protection. When they reached the modest homestead, a sturdy cabin, a weathered barn, and a corral holding a few good horses, Gus, his only ranch hand, emerged from the barn. Gus was a man carved from the same tough timber as the land itself, his face a roadmap of hard years and harder wisdom. He took one look at the woman in Caleb's arms and his expression tightened. He wiped his hands on a rag, his gaze sharp. "Bringing home strays again, Caleb?" he asked, his voice gravelly. "This kind of stray brings wolves." Caleb dismounted, carefully lifting the woman down. Her legs buckled, and he held her fast. This one needed help, Gus. That's all that matters. He carried her toward the cabin, the screen door groaning in protest as he pushed it open. He laid her gently on the simple cot in the main room, the one that had been his own before he'd moved into the larger room with his wife. He turned to Sarah, who had followed them in, her expression a mixture of awe and worry. Go fetch some water from the basin, sweet pea. And a clean cloth. As Sarah scurried to obey, Caleb knelt beside the cot. The woman's eyes were closed now, her face slack with an exhaustion so deep it looked like a surrender. He brushed a stray strand of matted hair from her forehead. Her skin was feverish. Gus appeared in the doorway, his arms crossed over his chest. You don't know who she is, son. Or what she's running from. A woman don't end up like that on the trail without a powerful reason. And that reason usually carries a gun. Caleb's jaw was set. I know. But I also know what it is to have nowhere left to run. We'll take care of her. We'll keep her safe. The woman stirred, her eyelids fluttering. Her name, she whispered, was Amelia. And then she slipped into a restless, fever-haunted sleep. As Caleb stood to prepare a poultice for her wounds, Sarah returned with the water and cloth. She looked at the sleeping Amelia, her brow furrowed with a child's profound seriousness. She tugged on her father's sleeve, her voice small but firm. Daddy, she said, her eyes pleading as they met his. She's like a lost bird. We have to help her. Caleb placed a hand on his daughter's head, his heart aching with a familiar mix of love and sorrow. It was in these moments he saw his late wife in Sarah, her boundless compassion, her immediate empathy for any wounded thing. He had tried to shield Sarah from the harshness of the world, but her mother's spirit shone through, a stubborn light he would never extinguish. We will, Sarabelle, he promised. We will. He spent the night by Amelia's side, changing the cool cloths on her forehead, listening to her mutter fragmented words in her sleep. Names he didn't know. Places he'd never heard of. But one word came more than others, a name spat out with venom and fear. Finch. The name settled in the air like a vulture, a promise of the trouble Gus had predicted. But as the first light of dawn crept through the cabin window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, Caleb felt not regret, but a strange sense of purpose. He looked at the sleeping woman, then at his daughter curled up in her own small bed across the room. He had built this life, this small fortress of solitude, to protect what was left of his world. Now, the world had come knocking, bruised and bleeding, and asked for sanctuary. He would not turn it away. Days bled into a week. Amelia's fever broke, and the deep exhaustion began to recede from her eyes, replaced by a guarded watchfulness. She spoke little, offering only clipped, vague answers about her past. She said she was a widow, that her wagon had been attacked by bandits who left her for dead. The story was thin, threadbare in places, and Caleb knew it. But he didn't press. He gave her space, time, and the quiet dignity of work. He saw the way she flinched at sudden movements, the way her gaze constantly swept the horizon as if expecting an army to appear over the crest of the hill. The fear was a living thing inside her, a constant companion. Yet, she was not idle. As her strength returned, she insisted on helping. She mended Caleb's shirts with stitches so fine they were nearly invisible. She helped Sarah with her letters, her voice patient and kind. She learned to milk their lone cow and knead bread with a surprising ferocity, as if pouring all her unspent anger and fear into the dough. She was a woman of contradictions, fragile as a desert flower in one moment, resilient as prairie grass in the next. The cabin, once a space defined by masculine routine and a child's presence, began to change. The scent of baking bread mingled with the familiar smell of leather and wood smoke. A jar of wildflowers, picked by Sarah and arranged by Amelia, sat on the rough-hewn table. It was a subtle shift, but for Caleb, it was seismic. It was the slow, creeping return of a warmth he thought had been buried forever with his wife, Mary. He found himself watching Amelia. He watched the determined set of her jaw as she scrubbed the floor, the gentle curve of her neck as she read to Sarah by the firelight, the way her eyes, when she forgot to be afraid, sparkled with a hidden intelligence and wit. A quiet understanding grew between them, built not on words, but on shared tasks and silent glances across the supper table. He saw the strength she tried so hard to conceal. She saw the profound kindness he tried to hide beneath a stoic exterior. Sarah, however, needed no such quiet observation. She had adopted Amelia with the simple, absolute conviction of a child. She followed her everywhere, chattering about her pony, the hawk's nest in the cottonwood tree, and the stories her mother used to tell her. One evening, as Caleb was cleaning his rifle on the porch, he watched through the window as Amelia helped Sarah brush her hair before bed. Amelia was humming a soft lullaby, her fingers moving deftly through the child's tangled locks. Sarah leaned her head back against Amelia's side, her eyes closing in contentment. "You smell nice," Sarah murmured. "Like my mama did." Like cinnamon and sunshine, Amelia's hand stilled. A look of such profound sadness crossed her face that Caleb had to look away, feeling like an intruder on a sacred, sorrowful moment. Later, after Sarah was asleep, Amelia joined him on the porch. The night was alive with the chirp of crickets, and the moon cast a silvery sheen over the landscape. For a long time, they sat in silence. "She's a wonderful child," Amelia said finally, her voice soft. "She is," Caleb agreed. "She's all I have left of her mother." Amelia wrapped her arms around herself, a gesture of self-protection he'd come to recognize. I'm sorry for the trouble I've brought to your door, Caleb. I know your man, Gus, doesn't trust me. Gus doesn't trust the weather," Caleb said, a rare, faint smile touching his lips. "It's not you he distrusts. It's the shadow that follows you." Her face clouded over. A shadow is the right word for it. She looked out at the vast, dark prairie. "Sometimes I think I'll never outrun it," he wanted to ask, to demand the truth. Who was Finch? What had he done to her? But he held his tongue. He knew that trust, like a skittish colt, couldn't be forced. It had to be earned, slowly and patiently. "You're safe here, Amelia," he said instead, his voice low and certain. "I won't let anyone hurt you or my daughter." "That's a promise." She turned to look at him, her blue eyes shimmering in the moonlight. For the first time, the fear in them was overshadowed by something else, something tentative and fragile. Gratitude. Maybe even hope. She gave him a small, trembling smile. "I know," she whispered. And in that moment, under the vast, star-dusted canopy of the western sky, the walls around Caleb's heart cracked just a little wider. The trouble Gus had warned of arrived not on horseback, but on a piece of paper. Caleb had ridden into the small settlement of dusty streets and false front buildings that passed for a town to buy supplies. Pinned to the notice board outside the general store, a fresh poster fluttered in the breeze. His blood ran cold as he read it. It was a notice of a runaway wife. It described Amelia perfectly, from the color of her hair to a small crescent-shaped scar above her eyebrow he'd only just noticed. It offered a handsome reward for her return. And at the bottom, a name was printed in bold, arrogant letters: Bartholomew Finch. The notice painted Amelia as a thief and a liar, a woman who had stolen from her loving husband and fled in the night. It was a cunning lie, designed to turn any decent folk against her. As Caleb stood there, men leaving the saloon glanced from the poster to him, their expressions shifting from neighborly nods to suspicion. They knew he'd been sheltering a woman. Whispers had already started. Bartholomew Finch was a name that carried weight, a wealthy land baron from back east who had been buying up vast tracts of territory, a man known for his ruthlessness and his long reach. He wasn't some common outlaw. He was a man of power, a man who could twist the law to his will. Caleb tore the poster from the board, crumpling it in his fist. He bought his supplies in stony silence, feeling the weight of judgmental eyes on his back. The ride home was heavy with dread. He had to tell her. When he arrived back at the ranch, he found Amelia in the yard, teaching Sarah how to skip stones across the water trough. They were laughing, and the sound was so pure, so full of a joy he hadn't realized was missing from his life, that it felt like a physical blow. He couldn't protect them from this. Not forever. He waited until Sarah was out of earshot, then he held out the crumpled paper. Amelia's face went white as she read it. The laughter died in her eyes, replaced by the familiar, hunted look he despised. "He found me," she breathed, the paper falling from her trembling fingers. How could he have found me? She sank onto the porch steps, her head in her hands. "I'm not his wife," she said, her voice muffled. "I was never his wife. My father was a desperate man, deep in debt to him. Finch saw me as another asset to be acquired, a part of the payment. I was to be his bride. He was cruel, Caleb, a monster who enjoyed the fear of others. I ran the night before the wedding. The story tumbled out of her, a torrent of fear and desperation. Finch was a collector of beautiful things, and he had considered her his most prized acquisition. When she defied him, his pride had been wounded. This wasn't about love. It was about possession. It was about punishing the one thing he couldn't buy. "You have to let me go," she said, looking up at him, her eyes pleading. He'll destroy you. He'll take your ranch, everything you've built. He'll hurt Sarah. I can't. I can't be the reason for that. Caleb knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. They were cold as ice. I made you a promise, Amelia. I don't break my promises, but you didn't know, she cried. You didn't know who you were fighting. It doesn't matter who he is, Caleb said, his voice a raw, unshakable force. It only matters who I am. And I'm not a man who turns his back on someone who needs him. This is your home now. As long as you want it to be. A single tear rolled down her cheek. Why? Why would you do this for me? He looked into her eyes, and the truth of it was so simple, so powerful, it left him breathless. The warmth he'd felt, the purpose, the way the cabin felt like a home again, it was all because of her. He wasn't just protecting a stranger anymore. Because, he said, his thumb gently wiping away her tear, when Sarah looks at you, she sees her mother's kindness. And when I look at you, I see a reason to fight again. The confession hung in the air between them, fragile and new. In that moment, the threat of Bartholomew Finch seemed to fade, replaced by the dawning of a love that was as wild and untamable as the land itself. But they both knew the shadow was no longer just following. It had arrived. And it would demand a price. A few days later, two men rode up to the ranch. They weren't lawmen. They were hard-faced riders with pistols tied low on their hips, the kind of men who work for money and ask no questions. Finch's men. Caleb met them on the porch, his rifle held loosely in his hands. Gus stood in the barn doorway, a pitchfork in his grip, looking more dangerous than any man with a gun. We are looking for a woman, the lead rider snarled, his eyes sweeping over the cabin. Property of Mr. Bartholomew Finch. We have reason to believe she's here. Caleb's expression was granite. There's no one here by that name. You're on private land. I'd advise you to leave, the man chuckled, a humorless sound. Mr. Finch is a powerful man. He doesn't take kindly to thieves. Or to men who help thieves. He's offering you one chance to hand her over. It'll be easier for everyone. From inside the cabin, the door creaked open. Amelia stood there, her face pale but her chin held high. Sarah clung to her skirts, peering out from behind her. The sight of them, a ready-made family standing defiant, seemed to infuriate the rider. There she is, he spat, hiding behind a farmer and a child. Come on now, girl. The boss wants a word. Amelia's hand tightened on Sarah's shoulder. I'm not going with you. Caleb took a step forward, placing himself squarely between Finch's men and the cabin door. You heard the lady. The conversation is over. The rider's hand drifted toward his pistol. This ain't over. Mr. Finch will be paying a visit himself. And he won't be as polite as we are. They wheeled their horses around and galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust and a heavy silence in their wake. The threat was no longer a piece of paper. It was real. That night, the mood in the cabin was thick with tension. Amelia barely touched her food. Sarah, sensing the fear, was quiet and subdued. After he tucked his daughter into bed, Caleb found Amelia staring out the window into the oppressive darkness. This is my fault, she whispered, her back to him. No, he said, coming to stand beside her. This is his fault. It's the fault of a cruel man who thinks he can own people. He gently turned her to face him, his hands resting on her arms. Her body was rigid with fear. Look at me, Amelia. She slowly lifted her gaze to his. We are going to face this. Together. You, me, Gus. We are not going to run. He has money, power, she argued, her voice trembling. He can hire a dozen more men like those. What do you have? I have this land, he said, his voice resonating with a deep, primal certainty. I have my daughter. I have my honor. And now, I have you. That's more than enough to fight for. He drew her closer, his calloused hands moving to cup her face. He saw the terror in her eyes, but beneath it, he saw the fire he'd come to admire. He saw the woman who kneaded her anger into bread, the woman who had survived the wilderness alone, the woman who had captured his daughter's heart and was quickly capturing his. He lowered his head and kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of gentle romance, but one of desperate, profound connection. It was a promise in the face of a storm, a staking of a claim not of ownership, but of alliance. It tasted of fear and dust and the faint, sweet scent of hope. When he pulled back, her eyes were wide, her lips parted. The rigidity was gone, replaced by a raw vulnerability. Caleb, she breathed. Don't be afraid, he murmured, his forehead resting against hers. He might have money and men, but we have something he'll never understand. We have a home. And we will defend it. The next few days were a blur of preparation. Caleb and Gus rode the perimeter of the ranch, checking for weaknesses, reinforcing fences. They cleaned and oiled every firearm they owned. There was no talk of surrender, no talk of running. A silent, grim determination had settled over the small homestead. Amelia refused to be sidelined. She learned to load Caleb's spare rifle, her hands surprisingly steady. She stockpiled food and water in the cabin, turning it into a small, defensible fortress. She worked alongside them, her fear channeled into a focused energy. In the midst of the tension, their bond deepened, forged in the crucible of shared purpose. Their nights were spent talking by the fire, sharing stories of the lives they'd led before their worlds had collided. He told her about Mary, about the sickness that had taken her too soon, about the crushing loneliness that had followed. She told him about her father, a good man broken by bad luck, and about the gilded cage Finch had prepared for her. They were two people marked by loss, who had found in each other a reason to look toward the future. The attack came not at night, as they had expected, but in the brazen light of late afternoon. Bartholomew Finch rode up to the ranch himself, flanked by 4 of his hired guns. He was a stark contrast to the rugged landscape, dressed in a fine city coat and polished boots, a man who sought to tame the wild world around him, including its people. He sat on his pristine black stallion, a sneer on his handsome, cruel face. "Caleb," he called out, his voice carrying an arrogant authority. "I've come for what is mine. Send out Amelia, and I will be merciful. I will only take your ranch as compensation for your troubles." Caleb stepped onto the porch, his rifle in his hands. "She's not yours to take, Finch. And this ranch is not for sale." Finch's eyes narrowed. "You are a fool. A dirt-scrabbling widower playing at being a hero. You think you can protect her from me?" "I am the law in these parts. You're just a bully with a fat wallet," Caleb retorted, his voice calm and cold. "And you're not welcome here." From the cabin window, Amelia watched, her heart pounding. Sarah was hidden in the small root cellar beneath the floorboards, a place they had designated as the safest. Amelia held the spare rifle, its weight both terrifying and reassuring. Finch laughed, a dismissive, ugly sound. "So be it," he gave a curt nod to his men. The world exploded in a chaos of gunfire. Caleb dove behind a water trough as bullets splintered the wood of the porch railing where he had just been standing. Gus returned fire from the barn, his old shotgun barking a defiant roar. The fight was desperate and brutal. Finch's men were professionals, advancing methodically, using the corrals and outbuildings for cover. But Caleb and Gus knew this land. Every rock, every dip in the terrain, was an ally. The air filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder and the terrifying whine of ricocheting lead. One of Finch's men went down, clutching his leg, a well-aimed shot from Gus's shotgun. Another yelped as a bullet from Caleb's rifle grazed his arm, sending him scrambling for better cover. Finch, staying back from the direct fighting, grew enraged. This was supposed to be easy. A simple show of force. "Burn him out," he screamed. One of his men pulled a torch from his thulbag, its flame a bright, wicked tongue against the afternoon sky. He ran toward the barn. This was it. The moment the fight would be won or lost. Caleb knew he couldn't let the fire start. The barn held their food, their tools, their winter hay. Losing it would mean a slow death for the ranch, even if they survived the gunfight. He laid down covering fire, but the man was fast, ducking and weaving. Just as the man reached the barn wall, a shot rang out from the cabin. It was clean and true. The man with the torch dropped it, crying out and clutching his shoulder, the shot having hit him squarely. He stumbled back, out of the fight. Everyone froze for a second, looking toward the cabin. Amelia stood in the doorway, the rifle smoking in her hands, her face a mask of fierce determination. She was no longer a victim. She was a defender of her home. The sight of her, so defiant, so powerful, seemed to break something in Finch. His cold fury turned into a wild, irrational rage. This woman, this property, was fighting back. He drew his own ornate pistol and spurred his horse forward, charging not at Caleb, but directly at the cabin. At Amelia. Caleb's blood ran cold. He was too far away, pinned down by the remaining gunman. "Amelia, get back," he yelled, his voice raw with panic. But she stood her ground, trying to reload the rifle with shaking hands. It was too slow. Finch was almost upon her, his face twisted in a mask of triumph. Suddenly, a small figure darted out from the side of the cabin. It was Sarah. She must have slipped out of the cellar, terrified by the noise. She ran toward the porch, her arms outstretched. "Amelia!" she cried. Finch saw her. A cruel, opportunistic smile spread across his face. He changed his horse's direction, reaching down to scoop the child up. A hostage. The perfect, final victory. It happened in a heartbeat. As Finch leaned down, his attention diverted, Caleb saw his opening. He rose from his cover, ignoring the last gunman, and fired. One shot. It was all he had time for. The shot was perfect. Finch jerked in the saddle, a look of stunned surprise on his face, before he toppled sideways, landing in a heap in the dust. His horse, panicked, bolted. The last gunman, seeing his employer fall, wasted no time. He fired one last wild shot before mounting up and fleeing, disappearing over the horizon. An abrupt, deafening silence fell over the ranch, broken only by the whimpering of the injured man and the sound of Sarah's frantic sobs. Caleb ran to his daughter, scooping her into his arms and holding her tight, his heart hammering against his ribs. "It's okay, Sarah Bell. It's over. You're safe." Amelia rushed to them, her rifle forgotten, her face streaked with tears and gunpowder. She wrapped her arms around both of them, her body trembling uncontrollably. The three of them stood there, clinging to one another in the middle of the dusty yard, a small, battered family that had faced the wolf at their door and won. Gus emerged from the barn, his old shotgun smoking. He looked at the fallen form of Finch, then at the three of them huddled together. He spat on the ground. "Told you that kind of stray brings wolves," he said, his voice rough with emotion. He then allowed a slow, weary smile to spread across his weathered face. "But I never figured she'd be the one to bite back so hard." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the scene of the battle, they were no longer just a cowboy, a child, and a runaway. They were survivors. They were a family. And their home, though scarred, was still standing. The aftermath of the fight was a somber, necessary affair. The local sheriff, a reasonable man who had always been wary of Finch's encroaching power, came out to the ranch. After hearing the testimony of Caleb, Amelia, and a surprisingly talkative Gus, and seeing the evidence of the assault, he ruled it a clear case of self-defense. Finch's body was taken away, and his injured men were hauled off to jail. The name that had been a specter of terror over Amelia's life was finally reduced to a closed chapter in a dusty town ledger. With the immediate threat gone, a profound quiet settled over the ranch. It was a quiet filled not with loneliness, but with healing. Caleb repaired the splintered porch rail. Amelia scrubbed the gunpowder stains from the cabin door. Sarah, after the initial shock, seemed to understand on a primal level that the danger had passed. The fear that had lived in the corners of their home was swept out, replaced by a deep, abiding sense of peace. One evening, a week after the fight, Caleb found Amelia by the corral, watching the horses as they grazed in the twilight. She looked different now. The haunted, hunted look was gone from her eyes, replaced by a calm strength. "He's really gone," she said, more to herself than to him. "It's hard to believe it," Caleb said, coming to stand beside her. He leaned against the fence, his shoulder brushing hers. "It's over." She turned to him, her expression serious. "Caleb, I never wanted to bring this danger to you." "To Sarah you didn't bring it," he said, turning to face her fully. He took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. "You brought life back to this place, Amelia. You brought a strength I didn't know I was missing. You taught Sarah how to laugh without a shadow in her eyes. You reminded me what it feels like to have something to fight for, beyond just surviving." Her eyes grew misty. "And you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "you showed me that not all men are monsters. You showed me what kindness and honor look like. You gave me a home when I had nothing." The air between them was charged with all the things they had overcome, and all the things that were just beginning. The romance that had blossomed under threat could now finally breathe in the open air. "I don't want this to be just a sanctuary for you, Amelia," Caleb said, his voice low and earnest. "I don't want it to be just a place you were hiding. I want it to be your home. Our home." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, simple object. It was a ring, one he had carved himself from a piece of smooth, dark wood from the old cottonwood tree. It wasn't fancy, but it was made with his hands, imbued with the spirit of the land he loved. "I know it's not gold or silver," he said, his heart beating a steady rhythm against his ribs. But it's strong. It's real. Just like what I feel for you. Amelia, will you marry me? Will you and I and Sarah, will we be a family? Tears streamed freely down her face now, but they were tears of joy, washing away the last remnants of her painful past. She threw her arms around his neck, her answer a choked, breathless yes as he slipped the wooden ring onto her finger. A small voice piped up from the porch. Are you gonna be my new mama? Sarah stood there, her face alight with a hope so pure it was dazzling. Amelia knelt and held her arms open wide, and Sarah ran into her embrace. Yes, sweet girl, Amelia whispered into her hair. I am. Caleb knelt beside them, wrapping his arms around them both, completing the circle. He looked over their heads at the vast, star-filled sky, a sky that had once seemed so empty and now felt full of promise. And so we ask again, what happens when one good man chooses kindness in a cruel world? The answer was here, in this embrace. It creates a family. It builds a future. It proves that love is not just a shelter from the storm, but the light that guides you home. Do you believe that the deepest love is forged in the hardest fires? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to share this story of a love as resilient and beautiful as the West itself.